Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Tianxin Yuan, and I am a program coordinator at the Berggren Research Center at Peking University. Thank you all for participating in today's workshop, How the Chinese Public View AI. This workshop is the third installment of the AI Narratives in China series. It is an honor to organize this workshop with the Leverhulme Center for Future Intelligence at the University of Cambridge. CFI, as we call it, has started the Global AI Narratives project to understand how different worldviews shape the hopes and fears surrounding AI steady advance and to foster new thinking about AI. The Berggren Research Center at Peking University is a collaboration between Los Angeles-based Berggren Institute and Peking University. We are a hub for East-West research and dialogue dedicated to the cross-cultural and interdisciplinary study of the transformations affecting humanity. Intellectual themes for researchers and visiting scholars focus on frontier technologies and society. For more information of our events, please follow event information on our website and social media. The AI Narratives in China project is dedicated to disseminating AI narratives in China and gaining a deeper understanding of the cultural, philosophical, and psychological structures that shape public perceptions of AI and other frontier technologies in China today. To identify and understand what shapes the contemporary understanding of AI, the series focuses on three topics: depictions of machines and intelligent beings in cultural resources from ancient China, AI narratives in contemporary sci-fi literature, and the public's views on AI. In the first workshop in August 2020, we focused on how the descriptions of intelligent machines and supernatural beings in ancient Chinese classic folklore literature and religions influence people's perceptions and imaginations of AI today. By zooming in on contemporary Chinese AI-based sci-fi, the second workshop offered a clear introduction of how AI is depicted in Chinese sci-fi literature over the last 4 decades and discussed over what makes Chinese sci-fi distinct from its Western counterparts. Videos and event summaries of the two workshops are available on our website and social media accounts. So in the workshop today, we will have Dr. Wu Fang share the research on the influence of media use on public perceptions of AI in China, which builds a perfect comparison study with Dr. Kanta Dihal's presentation on scary robots, examining the British public responses to AI. Both papers are based on nationwide online surveys. And after a short Q&A and break, we will come back with Dr. Zeng Jing to discuss public discourse about AI on WeChat and People's Daily, and Ms. Yishu on online public discourse on AI and ethics in China, which draws information from Chinese social media platforms WeChat and Zhihu. We will open the floor for questions after their presentations, and everyone is encouraged to leave your comments and questions in Zoom's chat box. Our staff will collect questions, and I will ask presenters. We will collect questions we also collected questions from registration forms. The event will finish at 9 p.m. Beijing time, and we would appreciate if you could mute yourself during the event, and the event is recorded only by the organizer. Thank you. And next, I will let Dr. Kanta Dihal to share her opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us. It's great to see so many of you, and quite a few of you returning after our first and second Global AI Narratives China workshop, as well as seeing several of you from other workshops that we have held around around the world. So it is a real honor to be here to organize this series of workshops together with the Berggruen Research Center at Peking University. And like we all just heard, how the Chinese public view AI is the third in a series of workshops, with the first focusing on AI narratives in Chinese classics and their influence on society today. And the second one being AI narratives in contemporary Chinese science fiction. And in both cases, our partner organizations had created a fascinating gathering of experts, both esteemed scholars and internationally renowned science fiction authors, with the science fiction workshop in particular drawing what is for us in the UK absolutely massive audience of 12,000 people watching via the live stream, which completely blew us away, only to hear very laconically from the China team, well, yes, but China is very big. For those of you who missed those workshops, you can read the summaries and watch the video highlights on our website, ainarratives.com. And so for those of you who aren't familiar with the wider Global AI Narratives project, I'll give a very brief introduction. So this project is led by myself and Dr. Stephen Cave, who is also here today. And we started this project emerging from the AI Narratives project that started in 2017. Its main publications are shown on this slide. So we investigated the portrayals and perceptions of AI in the English-speaking world, what the dominant narratives look like and how they portray the technology, those who build it, and those who are affected by it. And this Anglophone Western tradition was our starting place because it's the cultural sphere with which we're most familiar, but also one that's arguably disproportionately influential in other parts of the world. So for example, it's the cultural sphere that pervades the AI researchers of Silicon Valley. But of course, as the impact of AI will be global, managing it for the benefit of all will require international and cross-cultural collaboration and understanding. And different cultures, as we have seen so far, see AI through very different lenses, with lots of different religious, linguistic, philosophical, literary, cinematic traditions leading to different conceptions of intelligent machines. So to build trust and collaboration across cultures, we must understand these different ways of seeing what AI can and should be. And this is why we set up the Global AI Narratives project in 2018, which emphasizes the narratives outside the English-speaking West, including narratives from countries that have AI technologies imposed on them from outside and other rising AI superpowers. So through a series of workshops, virtual and in person, around the world, we're developing a global network of people who work and think in the field of AI narratives in the broadest sense. And we've had virtual and in-person workshops in Singapore, Japan, Russia, Egypt, Germany, Czechia, Chile, South Africa, and of course China, with at least 4 more workshops planned for this year. What we've learned so far has been extremely exciting. So I'd recommend you to have a look at the reports and videos on our website, ainarratives.com, to learn more about each region. And today, we will be focusing on the question of how the Chinese public view AI. The question of public perceptions is central to our project, and our team has, a few years ago, looked at public perceptions of AI in the UK. So you'll be hearing more about that from me later, as I'll be sharing those findings. And by sharing expertise on public perceptions both ways, we hope today to lay the groundwork for future research into perceptions of AI around the world. Thank you for joining us today.
So next, let's welcome Dr. Wu Fang to share her findings on her findings based on a nationwide survey.
Oh, thank you, Xingyuan. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you okay.
All right. Okay. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And my name is Wu Fang. I'm an associate professor from School of Media and Communication in Shanghai Jiao University. And it's a great honor of mine to be here and share our findings on media use and public perceptions of artificial intelligence in China with you. And my speech today is primarily based on a study collaborated by Dr. Cui Di from Fudan University and I. And from the screen, you can see the details of the study. Well, it is a self-evident truth that artificial intelligence is one of the most prominent technologies at the moment around the world. It's a buzzword we hear from time to time in the news, in the industry report, and even in daily chats between families and friends. So I think this online forum we are participating now also annotates the current popularity of artificial intelligence. And China has benefited substantially from developing internet-related technologies in recent years. China has the largest internet population and the supreme-sized online market. It is now home to several major world-class tech giants and hundreds of tech unicorns and numerous digital innovations. So in recent years, the government has made new commitments to boosting the artificial intelligence industry. In 2017, the State Council issued an official initiative for China to become the world's primary artificial intelligence innovation center by 2030. Major internet companies such as Alibaba and Tencent have committed to develop the AI-related technologies. With the enormous government and business investments, China is already among the global leaders in artificial intelligence research and development. However, artificial intelligence to many people, including me, is still a vague phenomenon. It's because its technological sophistications, but also the cultural complexity and semantic polysemy. Well, in everyday discourses, artificial intelligence can refer to many things, many applications, and many experiences. And in this way, from communication perspectives, artificial intelligence is far from an object or technology with fixed forms or shapes, but rather, artificial intelligence appears to be media construct or media imaginary that may vary from context to context. And given the users are not simply using artificial intelligence, but participating in making or modifying artificial intelligence products, it becomes important for us to understand how people perceive and feel about AI and how they come to have these perceptions. Actually, this is a very traditional question for artificial intelligence because people's perception of AI may directly impact on the technology itself. Our study here, very exploratory in nature, aimed to examine how a couple sets of factors influence the public perceptions and policy support of artificial intelligence in China. Well, before moving to the details of the study, we first like to discuss some broader pictures about technology studies from media perspectives. This is not derived from our findings. This graph is our reflections on social shaping of technologies in the case of artificial intelligence. AI certainly falls into the category what we conventionally understood as emerging technology. Therefore, I think social shaping framework is still very useful to interpret the trajectory of artificial intelligence development in social cultural contexts. We are quite familiar with the social shaping mechanisms as outlined by Pinch and Baker. Artificial intelligence may be shaped by a nexus of social groups who have varying definitions, problems, and call for different solutions. In this process, technologies have certain degrees of interpretive flexibility. Well, it is interesting to note the framework did not speak much about the communication mechanisms. Actually, according to theories like diffusion of innovation, we have reasons to believe that social shaping processes must involve many communication processes. When it comes to artificial intelligence, we propose that communication dimensions may play a more and more important role. That is largely because artificial intelligence is a special kind of technology that differs from other innovations. First of all, our existing notion of media use or technology use binarism does not fit into the way people engage with artificial intelligence. When using something, we are usually deliberate or intentional. We are proactive making use of something. But artificial intelligence can work even when we have no knowledge of it or simply unaware of its existence. Of course, we can use artificial intelligence. For example, we can command our smart devices through robots, but more often, we flatly encounter artificial intelligence, experience artificial intelligence, or come into AI-mediated situations. And this process is very different from the way we use a car or use telephone. So rather than just use it, the way we interact with AI is to guess it, feel it, imagine it, or neglect it. So it's just as difficult to find a 100% AI user as to find someone who absolutely does not use AI. This means that we may need to update our understanding about social shaping framework. And second, we also know that users of artificial intelligence are also producers of AI. The user data are important means of production. And user groups also not only come up with definitions or perceived issues suggested by social shaping theory, users' communication can be converted to designs of artificial intelligence. Our traditional understanding was that people's attitudes, perceptions, and feelings about the technology is outside the production. At most, they are users' feedback that can be collected for future designers' reference. But for artificial intelligence, users' feelings, perceptions, and imaginaries now can be understood as a new type of interpretive productivity. They are not just response. Now they become integral to social shaping processes. We imagine and feel about AI, and the evolution of artificial intelligence will be related to that. Therefore, we propose that communication factors should be given more credit in understanding the social shaping of artificial intelligence. This can be a communication system in addition to social technical system. And communication at all levels work together, including mass media, professional news organizations, platform-mediated communication, and even interpersonal communication. This nexus of communication can be understood as the new entities that constructed the trajectory of artificial intelligence in societies. Okay, we have taken a detour and talked about social shaping theory should consider its relationship with artificial intelligence. It may have sounded a little grandiose, but we think it's an important issue to begin with. And now we turn back to micro and more concrete discussion. And this study is relatively traditional one. We focus on the relationship between media and the people's perceptions, but again, we want to say that people's perceptions and feelings are very significant to social shaping of AI. And this is the research framework of our study. As an exploratory study, we first included the extensively studied cognitive factors and affective factors in science communication in model to test the associations of these factors, including personal relevance, perceived knowledge, deference to scientific authority, and negative emotions. And we test the associations of these factors with Chinese public's perceptions of artificial intelligence, including their risk perceptions, benefit perceptions, and policy support. And the focus of this study is the impact of communication factors on the Chinese public's perceptions. And we examined both traditional media and social media as sources of AI-related information. We seek to find out, when controlling cognitive and affective factors, whether communication factors are still significantly related to Chinese people's perception of AI. And based on the theoretical framework, we proposed these research questions and hypotheses. And apart from how cognitive factors, affective factors, and communicative factors were related to the perceptions, and we were also interested in whether perceived personal relevance moderate the relationship between media use and AI perceptions. According to the information process perspective, individuals developed varying levels of motivation when processing media messages. It leads to differential media effects. Personal relevance usually serves as a direct indicator of individuals' motivations. So if one perceived artificial intelligence as having strong personal relevance, they are more likely to scrutinize media messages about AI and form attitudes based on their evaluation. Therefore, we seek to find out whether media effects differ at different levels of perceived personal relevance. And in this study, we conducted an online survey using the Chinese online research company called Zeng. And the sample was obtained from a national sampling pool of over 1.6 million panel members in 2017. And 746 questionnaires were completed. We dropped the invalid cases and yielding a sample size of 738. And here are the data and measures. And this study provides us the basic idea about the Chinese public's emotions and perceptions of artificial intelligence. And in this study, we asked the respondents how much AI technology made them feel concerned, worried, anxious, and we also asked if they generally hold negative emotions toward AI. And from this bar chart, we can see that participants generally disagree that they hold negative emotions toward artificial intelligence. And about public perceptions of AI, we can see from this figure that the Chinese public held a stronger benefit perception than risk perception of artificial intelligence. In terms of policy support, the Chinese public generally supports regulations for artificial intelligence development among economic entities and the scientific community. They also believe that the Chinese government should issue policies to guide AI development, and an international treaty should exist to manage AI development. And the two charts just show that the Chinese public is generally optimistic toward the technology of artificial intelligence. And in this study, we also asked how frequently the respondents used the television, newspaper, Weibo, and WeChat to follow artificial intelligence related information. And we found that WeChat was the most frequently used media for AI related information, followed by television. And newspaper was the least used media source of AI related information for the participants. As we expected, traditional media like television is still a primary source of AI related information for participants. And people still rely on media institutions to acquire information related to technology like AI, because access to and comprehend the information requires numerous professional resources. To test associations we proposed, we conducted hierarchical regressions on risk perception, benefit perception, and policy support. And here we can see personal relevance is a consistent predictor of risk perception, benefit perception, and policy support. When individuals perceive AI to be high personal relevance, they may engage with issue more deeply and therefore carefully examine both upsides and downsides. And emotional factors have a major impact on dependent variables. Negative emotions toward artificial intelligence seem to drive people to elaborate more on the technology and therefore increase both risk and benefit perceptions. In terms of communication factors, we found that the media use is only associated with participants' positive artificial intelligence perceptions. A probable reason is that the government has an overarching influence over China's media agenda. Both traditional and online media must report major issues in favor of government policies. Since the Chinese government supports artificial intelligence, the media agenda is likely to portray the technology in a positive light, and the positive framing of Chinese media drives respondents to perceive benefits rather than risks of artificial intelligence. And specifically, use of television and WeChat for information about artificial intelligence are positively associated with benefit perception and policy support, but the association between newspaper use and these two dependent variables is negative. A plausible explanation is that different mediums have unique attributes, such as the structure, textuality, interactivity, and modality, and therefore different effects on audiences. Newspaper presents artificial intelligence mostly in well-polished text and with limited visual aids, which foster the elaboration and critical thinking. Well, the production of newspaper strictly follows professional standards. Therefore, reading newspaper about AI may help people refrain from overly pessimistic or optimistic perceptions. And in contrast, as an audio-visual medium, television news presents AI in different modalities, combining audio and visual materials, which may amplify the effects of their positive AI framing. Although WeChat is also a text-based information source, its modality and routine of content production is different from newspaper. Most popular content on WeChat is not generated by news professionals. Many articles tend to be one-sided stories, and including text, sound, pictures, GIF, and videos. So, WeChat's opinion-oriented and multi-format content may reinforce their positive AI framing and trigger respondents' benefit perceptions and policy support. In terms of the interaction effects, we found several media effects were amplified in a group of participants who perceived less personal relevance of artificial intelligence. Personal relevance moderates the effects of newspaper and television use on benefits perception and the effects of newspaper use on policy support. And this means respondents with higher personal relevance will scrutinize the media content and think more critically about it. They may also turn to more diverse sources for AI-related information. Consequently, the effects of television and newspaper become weaker. Well, in conclusion, this pilot study explored the way people's AI perceptions were related to individual level factors based on a national survey in China. Overall, respondents' benefit perception scores are higher than risk perception, and policy support is also high. Similar to existing findings, this study indicates that the Chinese public support artificial intelligence technology and perceive it as having more benefits than risks. And we believe it is partly because in China, the development of communication factors were significantly associated with Chinese public's positive perceptions of AI. And we believe it's because in China, the development of AI receives governmental support, and the AI technology is framed positively by the media in general. And media channels vary in their effects on benefit perceptions and policy support, and we assume different attributes of media may result in various effects of audience. So, at the end of the speech, we sincerely recommend further studies to join us and investigate the complex influence of media on public perceptions of AI. Well, that would be all for my presentation today. Thank you very much.
Many thanks to Dr. Wu for sharing her research on how the Chinese public views AI and how online and traditional media influence public perceptions and the policy support of AI. So next, Dr. Kanta Dihal will also share her research on the public response to 8 most common narratives of AI in the UK.
Thank you very much. So as I already mentioned in my opening talk, we started with a project on AI narratives, from which global AI narratives emerged. In this project, we very early on discovered that the narratives around artificial intelligence in the English-speaking world tend to present extremes. They are either wildly utopian or horrendously dystopian. And we published some of that in this, oh, sorry, my slide just turned itself off. Let me try that again. In this book, AI Narratives. We noticed that while we were developing this project further, the way in which the developments in AI are communicated to and perceived by the general public will critically influence the adoption and use of this technology. And there is evidence that suggests that it's going wrong. So a report from the UK Parliament, to which we contributed in 2019, argues that currently many of the hopes and fears presently associated with AI are out of kilter with reality. And that view is shared by some of the foremost AI researchers, for example, Professor Margaret Bowden, who says, AI's future has been hyped since its inception. Overly enthusiastic predictions from some AI professionals have excited and sometimes terrified journalists and commentators. And in our work trying to find out how this is happening and why this is happening, our starting point is that AI is a tool. It is a piece of technology designed to help us achieve our goals, but it's supposed to be an intelligent tool. So a tool with attributes that we normally associate with humans. A tool that is autonomous, that can think, that has goals, and perhaps even a mind. And that makes it very different to ordinary tools, which has huge implications. First, these attributes are what promise to make AI the ultimate technology. While the thinking power of us as humans is limited by our cranial capacity, AI seems potentially limitless. It promises to work out the solutions to all our problems. So AI represents the ultimate fulfillment of the technological dream, the dream that we can use machines to create a paradise on Earth. And that is the source of our extravagant hopes. But at the same time, the idea of creating tools with minds of their own creates, to our minds, inherent instabilities. A tool with goals could have goals that misalign with ours. A smart machine could outsmart us. A machine with autonomy could choose to disobey, and that is the source of our extravagant fears. We've evidenced how intertwined those hopes and fears are. So Stephen Cave, my colleague who is here today as well, and I published a paper in Nature Machine Intelligence in 2019, and we analyzed a corpus of around 300 narratives about AI from both fiction, including film, and speculative non-fiction. And on the basis of that, identified 4 dichotomies, 4 related sets of hopes and fears that structure people's responses to intelligent machines. All of these are mediated, so flip over from a hope into a fear or vice versa, by the notion of control. The utopian, hopeful vision turns into a dystopian or a fearful one when people no longer feel in charge of their intelligent machines. So they are intimately connected, those hopes and fears. I will go through the hopes first and then their corresponding fears. And on the slide, you'll see their representations in some Anglophone science fiction, but also how these narratives have influenced the media headlines in the English-speaking world. So the first hope concerns life. And we have always used our technology to try to extend our lives. And it's no surprise that one of the great hopes for AI is that it will do exactly that. So one great hope is that it will make us what's called medically immortal, entirely immune to aging and disease. For instance, in stories where nanotechnology have become part of humanity, constantly protecting your body from the inside, to the point where you might never really experience pain anymore. But that's not real immortality, as it still relies to some extent on a single, messy, unreliable body. So the next step is to transcend the body altogether and upload our minds into cyberspace, which is the world of, for instance, the TV series Altered Carbon, where a body simply becomes a temporary extension of yourself that you can use to interact with the world. So our second hope concerns time. Assuming that we manage to stay alive, then we hope to use that time as we wish. So we dream of AIs that will free us from the burden of work. And not only does AI offer us all such a life of luxury and ease, but it does so without the complex social and psychological pressures of having human servants. The third hope concerns desire. So assuming that we manage to stay alive, then we hope to use all that free time with all the things that bring us pleasure. So AI promises to automate work, but it also promises to automate and therefore uncomplicate the fulfillment of every desire. So for instance, it can be the perfect friend, always there, always ready to listen, never demanding anything in return. And the image on the slide is of the film Her, where the operating system Samantha becomes such a friend and lover. And of course, many people hope that AI-driven androids will serve that function of the perfect lover as well. Now, finally, the fourth hope concerns security. So once we have created this paradise in which we have time and eternal life and all our desires are fulfilled, we would want to protect it. And stories of what we now call autonomous weapons are ancient and go back at least to ancient Greece, where Talos, the bronze giant, was said to have defended the island of Crete. And such stories continue throughout the Middle Ages to the Robocops of the present. But the utopian visions that all of these hopes reflect are inherently unstable. As I mentioned already, the factor that is key to the balance between this hope and fear is control, the extent to which humans are in control of the AI, rather than the AI being in control of the humans. And related to that idea of control is consent. Many of these more dystopian visions around AI revolve around disenfranchised people losing agency to those in control of the AI. And those visions are particularly pressing in today's debates, especially in Western countries, around privacy. So I'll now briefly look into the dystopian side as well. So on the subject of life, while people hope to achieve immortality, its flip side is that we might lose our humanity in the process, because what are we willing to sacrifice in order to live forever? Our memories, our emotions, our physical form, our body, our individuality. And of course, unequal distribution of AI-facilitated longevity can also increase existing inhumane treatment of those who are less well off. Altered Carbon, which I mentioned, the Netflix TV show and book series, shows that someone who is 3 or 4 or 500 years old simply cannot understand or empathize with our kind of humanity. And the kinds of people who would be able to afford this are not necessarily the kinds of people we would want to be in power for 500 years. Then fears of obsolescence emerge when we lose control of the amount of leisure time we have. At the same time as we dream of being free from work, we are terrified of becoming obsolete, of becoming unnecessary, of being put out of work and having nothing to do. Because not only does work provide us with an income, but also with a role in society, status, standing with pride, and a purpose in life. And that might become endangered when AI does everything better. And the fear of alienation is similarly related to the idea that AI could do everything better than humans, because if we all have our desires fulfilled by AIs, then we might have become redundant to each other. We might become obsolete, even in our own homes, in our own families, in our own relationships, when people prefer relationships with machines. And of course, finally, we can easily imagine how the hope of acquiring security turns into its flip side, the fear of being dominated. The fears in that transition are twofold. So first, there is the fear of simply losing control of very powerful weapons. But on another level, there's the fear that AIs will acquire minds of their own, that they will turn from tools into agents and willfully rise up against us. And that's because of that paradox at the heart of our relationship with intelligent machines. We want to create clever tools that can do everything we can do, but better. But it's not hard to see the tension in the idea of creating beings that are superhuman in capacity, but subhuman in status. So building on this work, we wanted to explore directly what the UK public believe AI is and how much they subscribe to these utopian and dystopian narratives. So at the end of 2018, we took these dichotomies to the BBC, to Kate Coughlin there, who with us undertook a nationally representative survey of just over 1,000 members of the UK population on their perceptions of AI. And it is very interesting to compare this to the results that Fang just presented in her excellent work, because they are very, very different indeed. So we solicited responses to these 8 narratives and views on what people think AI is, how likely it is to impact in respondents' lifetimes, and whether they feel they can influence it. So with our respondents, our first question is, have you ever heard of AI? And 85% of respondents claim to have heard of AI. So 11% had not heard of AI at all, and 4% answered, I don't know. So following on from that, we asked people who did say that they had heard of AI, how would you describe artificial intelligence to a friend? And on this slide, we show some of the replies that we got, because we solicited open responses, and 42% of respondents offered a plausible definition of AI, which is great, it's very encouraging, but 25% thought AI means robots. And that could be problematic because, well, first of all, imagining AI as embodied will lend itself to some narratives and understandings more than others. And the way in which humanoid embodied AI is gendered and racialized can perpetuate stereotypes. But more worryingly, 12% of respondents incorporated hopes or mostly fears entirely unprompted into their response. So these were replies such as, computers doing things instead of people, I hate it. Or scary robots, which we ended up using as the title of the article that came out of it. So these open responses suggest that a significant minority see any kind of artificial intelligence as inevitably or inherently bad. Now, then we asked respondents whether they were excited or concerned about the 8 narratives presented. And the best known visions of the impact of AI elicit significant anxiety. So while we presented these 8 narratives as 4 hopes and 4 fears, it was actually only 2 of those 8 that excited more, that elicited more excitement than worry, which are AI making life easier and extending life. And that turned out to map onto whether people expect these narratives to come true within their lifetime, where we must add that some respondents were over 80 years old. And the 2 narratives that people most expect to come true, humans being put out of work and AI subjugating humans, are ones they are seriously afraid of. So then we asked whether they felt like people were able to, in any way, influence the future of AI. And the vast majority of respondents felt they had no control at all over AI's development. And they cited the power of corporations or government or versions of technological determinism. So it's going to happen anyway, it's completely out of my control. So these perceptions of AI's possibilities, which may be quite detached from the reality of the technology, can influence how it is developed, deployed, and regulated. But the dystopian narratives, we must add, can have positive consequences. They do inspire developers and policymakers to take seriously concerns around safety and ethics, as long as these public perceptions are known. But at the same time, these extreme imaginings threaten to distort people's expectations. Even those 2 utopian ones, they could create false hopes that lead to a hype bubble. And that hype bubble bursting, those hopes not coming true, could foster mistrust of technologies that really could bring benefits to their lives. So in this survey, we have seen that the deployment of artificial intelligence in the UK will require contending with significant anxieties and rather extreme hopes and fears for AI. It's fascinating to see how this differs from the Chinese perspectives, and I look forward to seeing further in this workshop how we can get further into teasing out what the differences between these 2 countries are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kanta Dihal, for sharing your research. And next, we're going to enter into the Q&A session. And I've already collected several questions from our audience. So the first question is directed to Dr. Wu. So it's from our audience. So dear Dr. Wu, thank you a lot for your work. It's very interesting. I wonder though if the fairly small amounts of respondents, over 700, are enough to argue that Chinese public predominantly support and are optimistic about AI. Also, could you perhaps describe a little bit more who were those 700 participants? Example, their backgrounds, age, etc. And perhaps you've discussed that already, and I missed it. If so, this is from Mego B.
All right, thank you very much. It's a very good question. Due to the time limit, I didn't introduce the details of the sample. And among the 738 participants in our city, 44.2% of them are male, and the average age is 32.87 years old, and the range of the age is from 17 years old to 69 years old. And the median of education level is senior high school or equivalent. And that's the basic information about the sample of our study. And it is true that the sample size is quite limited. And our sample is not strictly a national sample because it's not randomly selected from the entire population of China, but it is a random sample from a national panel of around 2.6 million people. So although we will not say that it's a representative sample, but it's comparatively representative in terms of the geographics and social and economic status. So that's why we use this kind of a sample. And after we analyze the data, sorry, that's my cat. After analyze the data, we compare the results of a study to another national report issued by Fudan University. It's not an academic-oriented report, but it's more descriptive in nature. But the data, the sample is larger than us, and we found that in that report from Fudan University, they also find that Chinese people hold an optimistic attitude toward the technology of artificial intelligence. And I think we can compare the results of our study and to the report issued by Fudan University, and then get the result. And then we can make the statement that people are held a more positive perception. And I will share some links related to the report issued by Fudan University into the chat box.
Ask on behalf of a registrant. So it seems that Western countries have more negative or frightened views of AI compared to China. Are these accusations true? And if yes, why so? Kanta, are you interested in answering this?
Yes, certainly. Well, I think our survey, especially compared to the China survey, certainly showed that that was true. Thinking about a few things that have been mentioned as potential reasons why, one being that Chinese media use is associated with beneficial perceptions. I think in the UK, certain forms of media use would be much more associated with negative perceptions. So some of the headlines that I showed in my slideshow are from the UK tabloid newspapers that are famous for having extreme headlines and for kind of being frightened about everything. And those kinds of headlines really do influence people's views, frightening people further about things. So one thing that's very often used is a picture of the Terminator, you know, shiny metal killer robot with evil glaring red eyes, pasted onto a news article that could be about anything from drones to financial technology. So yeah, I think in the UK it's very much news media that create these negative perceptions much more than in China.
I think Liu Yang has a question.
Yeah, I can't. Is that okay? We open the floor for discussion. Okay, so the question was that you talk about, you know, this media sensationalism, right? So I guess this kind of a tech or strategy from a media can be equally applied in the China context, right? So if they want to draw people's eyeballs, and so the Chinese media can also and the sensationalized negative impact of AI. But I was wondering if we can dig deeper. So you mentioned that in the West, science fiction writers and for 100, 200, even more years, and has been writing about AI, and this kind of narrative shapes the opinion of the public, and mostly negative, not mostly, but some of them emphasize the negative influence. But on the other hand, in China, so notwithstanding we're talking about the current government is trying to support the positive kind of impact AI. But do you think there's a deeper kind of reason to why, for instance, who influenced the science and reinforced which one another came from 100 years ago? And in the Chinese context, so I think people usually have this very positive kind of view towards new technology. I can tell you a story, and maybe you don't know as a Westerner. So the Chinese are they're quite positive in many ways, and there is this phenomenon. It's a funny phenomenon, and this is maybe off the topic, but I want to tell the story. It's called a living shrine. So people, a shrine is usually a place where you respect your ancestors, things like that. But in China, and people in Qing Dynasty, in Tang Dynasty, and people will establish their own shrine when they're still alive. And even there's something like a living funeral, but people will throw a funeral for themselves. And so the idea was that they're trying to be very positive about life, and so this is something I would like you to comment on. But maybe we can dig deeper and just instead of and reporting a status quo, and after all, the goal of this workshop is trying to compare an Eastern and Western thought about why and we have this reaction instead of that reaction, and in face of this new technology. Thanks.
Thank you, Yang. Yes, this great point. I indeed didn't know about the living shrines and how they show a very different attitude towards life and death. So this, I guess, harks back to our previous Chinese AI narratives workshop, where we focused on science fiction and, well, established how much less of a science fiction tradition and deep history there was in science fiction in China compared to the West. With our research into AI narratives, we found that, well, not only is there a long science fiction tradition, there is a much longer tradition of imagining intelligent machines that goes way beyond what we consider to be science fiction. It goes back thousands of years. It goes back to ancient Greek mythology. And it goes back to a question that seems to be fundamental to human storytelling, to imaginations about what it means to be human, is can humans create something that is like a human? Can we do that artificially? Can we build it? Can we grow it? Can we do it in a way that is not standard human reproduction? And in some cultures that was connected to, well, can we do things that have been traditionally reserved in the for the gods? So can we be godlike in our creative powers? And I think that is where the hopes and fears come from, because it has always been considered a sort of superpower, an ultimate goal, and that brings with it both positive and negative aspects. So as an ultimate goal that would make us godlike, that is of course a very exciting end goal, but it's also one that's fraught with danger, because what if it goes wrong and we lose control? Or what if the gods become angry at us trying to achieve this and intervene, or are otherwise displeased with us? Or what if we discover that there are limits to what humans can or are allowed to do, and so we are doomed to failure? So it is that really long narrative history that keeps popping up throughout history that has influenced the science fiction in the West in such a way that those hopes and fears have always been part of the science fiction narratives that have been imagining artificial intelligence in an extremely wide range of shapes and forms.
I have another question for Dr. Wu. So could you elaborate as to whether there were any patterns of positive or negative emotions held towards AI at different levels of society? For example, negative emotions associated more at the individual level versus more positive at more of the national or cultural level?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. In our study, we didn't focus on the emotions at different levels. In China, I can briefly talk about my own observations. I think the emotion towards artificial intelligence at the national level is definitely positive, because now the artificial intelligence development has become the part of the big picture of the for the Chinese government. So, and at the individual level or at a micro level, according to Professor Zeng Jing's study, and the online opinion related to artificial intelligence is significantly, the agenda of online opinion is significantly set by the official agenda in China. So basically, I think the general emotion toward artificial intelligence at the individual level is positive as well, because the agenda, the emotion, the perception toward artificial intelligence at the individual level were largely shaped by the media in China, and the media in China is largely shaped by the government's attitude toward the artificial intelligence technology. However, I read several industrial reports related to artificial intelligence. They don't talk about the different emotions toward artificial intelligence at different levels, but they talk about the different attitudes toward artificial intelligence in different demographic groups. For example, one report found that males in China are more held more positive attitude toward artificial intelligence than females, and people working in the industry of engineering and technologies will hold more positive attitude toward artificial intelligence. And that's some information from other reports, and I just would like to share it to you.
Can I jump in to make comments on this? Even though this question is not for me, but I want to say that that kind of question was exactly part of the analysis we did in our study. So definitely, like what Fang just mentioned, based on our evidence, we compare the different actor groups on social media and on state media. The findings suggested that the governments definitely showed or presented a way more positive sentiment towards AI. But in general, our findings suggested that every group or every active group presented a very positive sentiment. Yeah, in the later presentation, I'm actually the next one, I think, I would talk more on that specific question.
We have another question. When we compare general levels of optimism or pessimism towards the future versus specifically towards AI, I wonder how that looks.
Well, my answer to this would be quite speculative because we have been looking specifically at AI. But in my broader research into science fiction and science narratives, I have come across a lot of dystopian work. And dystopias are certainly a sign of the times especially in the English-speaking West. So doom scenarios about the future have become incredibly popular in the past few decades, and especially among young people and teenagers. And I think that does indeed reflect some pessimism towards the future that is more widespread than AI alone. Now we see that pessimism towards new technologies more widely, again, in the news media, with skepticism about climate change, about genetically modified organisms, even about the COVID vaccine. Well, while it's unclear to me to what extent one has influenced and shaped the other, you can definitely see patterns of negativity about the future and about future developments in technology more broadly.
I have another question from my colleague Jiao to Dr. Wu Fang. In your paper, when discussing the reasons why WeChat is positively associated with benefit perceptions and policy support, you said it could be because WeChat's opinion and multi-format content may reinforce their positive AI framing. However, WeChat also has public accounts that publish negative opinion pieces on AI. So would those pieces influence public perceptions, and how do they relate to the perceptions of benefits of AI?
Thank you, Xingyuan and Jiao for the question. Well, that's a very good question. It's about the operationality of measuring media use in our study. Well, WeChat is a very special media in China. It's actually a convergence of many different things, like a social media and instant message and the feedly information feeding. So basically, although there are public accounts of newspapers in which the contents are produced professionally with two-sided messages and balanced opinions toward artificial intelligence, but it's just a very limited part of everything in WeChat. And most of the public account or content in the social media, which is called 朋友圈 in WeChat, is unprofessionally produced content related to artificial intelligence. And on the one hand, this kind of content are not strictly following the news production routines with the fact checking or two-sided messaging. So basically, this type of contents are strongly influenced by, I'll say, by the state-owned media. So basically, I think the agenda on WeChat is it's my assumption. I didn't do the research, but I think the agenda on WeChat is highly associated with the agenda related to artificial intelligence in television. So that's our assumption. So I think in future studies, when we operationalize the use of WeChat, we should separate these things. We should measure the use of WeChat public account and WeChat instant messages and WeChat social media. And that will help us to explain the complex of influence of WeChat on our attitude perceptions towards artificial intelligence.
So next, there's a question for the panel. How then can the public form a meaningful attitude towards AI if it does not understand the underlying technology? AI is also not one technology, but a whole ocean of very different and constantly changing technologies. So Kanta, you mentioned that people in their perceptions, they always feel, most of them feel that AI is embodied. So could you please share your views on this?
Yes, the fact that people don't fully understand what AI is, of course, limits understanding and, well, imagining what the technology could bring, what it could do in the future. But I would say that you don't have to understand it at an extremely granular detail. You don't have to understand what exactly the algorithm looks like and does in order to develop an informed opinion about things such as what it should be used for, how it should be deployed, what its positive and negative aspects are, because there are many different levels at which you can understand what an AI system is. So while I would say that it is very problematic that AI is, for instance, only associated with robots, I wouldn't say that you need to be extremely heavily educated in computer science for that kind of understanding. I think the problem with associating it with robots, again, comes from lots of exposure to media images where pictures of robots, and especially of androids, of humanoids that are often made of white plastic, are those kinds of stock images are being put on all kinds of communications about AI. And that creates that association. Whereas, well, as I said, these images are being put on communications about drones or about financial technology. So these aren't about robots at all. And so it's the association of these narratives with pictures of androids that I think is hugely responsible for that misunderstanding, and that's something that should certainly change, because that is a misdirection, and it is definitely possible for someone who has a minimal knowledge of computer science to get a perfectly good grasp of what a drone is, what facial recognition is, if they are not sort of cognitively distracted by that image of the white plastic android.
Thank you, Kanta. And there's another question for both of you. Has there been historical shifts in how the public views AI? Have you found any trace on this during your research?
I'm sorry, the history of, I didn't hear the clearly.
Historical shifts of how people view AI.
I mean, I would say I have no idea, because I we've only done one public survey, but we also discovered in reviewing the literature around surveying public perceptions that this is something that has started only very recently. And it's really only within the 21st century that the term artificial intelligence started to become widely known among the public. I mean, even so in 2001, Steven Spielberg released a film titled AI, Artificial Intelligence. And the reason why, at least according to an interview, he put artificial intelligence very explicitly in the title was because people did not recognize the term AI by itself. So that was 2001. So I think if you start looking at historical shifts, then it's you would very quickly get a complete drop in recognition of what people even understanding what AI is.
And I think that's the same case in China. Well, when I review literature related to artificial intelligence in China, I found that there was heat discussion related to what artificial intelligence is in the field of science and philosophy in 1980s in China. But after that, there was not much discussions on this topic. But now the topic came back again because now artificial intelligence for China is just around the corner, and people can see that artificial intelligence has become a real thing, not just a hypothetical. It's not just a hypothesis or a imagination. It real happens in our everyday life in China, and that's why people come back and talk about philosophy of artificial intelligence for another round. And if there has to be a shift, I will say that the shift would be now most of the people in China pay attention to the concept of artificial intelligence, although it's still a vague concept for us, but people think about it and people talk about it. And I think the massive attention to artificial intelligence is a new thing in the 21st century, and I'm very interested in it.
One last question for Dr. Wu. So it's also from my colleague. I really like your approach in the paper. I wonder if you have plans to do a study analyzing the media and platforms' content and see if the results match with what the survey told.
Oh, well, yes. I think one survey is way not enough for this topic, because we said that for the technology of artificial intelligence, communication factors can be very important, because it's for real that people's perceptions and reactions to the technology can help design artificial intelligence, right? Because when I talk about users of the very popular algorithm-based content platforms, and people will talk about how they train their algorithm. And that is a very direct interaction between human and artificial intelligence. So I think apart from survey and computer-aided content analysis, I think more qualitative studies are needed to understand how people interact with the technology. And I think it's even more important than the studies from the positivist approach.
Yeah. Next, Dr. Zeng Jing will share her analysis of public discourse about AI in China through the conceptual lens of public spheres theory and counter-public spheres.
Okay, I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Can everyone see my slides now? Okay. Cool. So Good evening and good afternoon, good morning, depends on where you are. My name is Jing. I'm Senior Research Associate at the Department of Media Communication Research in University of Zurich in Switzerland. And today I'm here to present a study from myself and my two collaborators, which are Dr. Chen from University of Shanghai in Germany, and Professor Schaefer, who is my colleague here at the University of Zurich. So just a little bit more information about me and the research we're doing here. I'm working under the division called Science Communication. So just a second, I need to move this window. In this research group, we are mainly interested in research around public debate and discussion about different science and the technology topics, such as artificial intelligence. So in today's today's talk, I'm going to present this specific study, where we analyzed the public discourse about artificial intelligence on two media outlets. One is on WeChat, another is People's Daily Online. And so I will first briefly introduce the research context and our research design. And after a brief presentation of the key findings and the conclusion, at the end of the presentation, I would also like to use this opportunity to share with you a new AI project we are about to launch later this year. So a little bit commercial and PR activity going on here. So this study is situated in media communication research, but we also integrated a sociological approach to understanding technology. So in prior literature, for example, from STAs, it has been long discussed that public discourse are constitutive of science and technology development. As Moscow wrote in the book Digital Sublime, technologies are mutually constituted out of a culture that creates meaning and a political economy that empowers it. So within this context, we believe that the concept of public sphere can serve as a very useful heuristic to interrogate this intersection between power contestation and meaning making. So from the discipline of communication research, of course, we are particularly interested in this mediated public sphere. We are interested in how artificial intelligence is imagined across different actor groups in the society. And focusing on such points, earlier research has shown that media discourses around AI are mostly sensationalized, industry-driven, and politicized. So to contribute to such scholarship, we conducted this study to understand AI discourses and discussion in the context of China. I assume in this workshop, I don't have to spend much time to justify or explain the relevance of looking at China and looking at artificial intelligence in the context of China as a country with the biggest online population. Fang has mentioned that before already, and a massive size of AI market, and also with a growing impact of a research output from this country. China is definitely one of those AI superpowers we have in this world, and we are interested in how such technologies are discussed or imagined in Chinese society. So to empirically answer such questions, we employed our theoretical framework from earlier research from science communication. More specifically, here we draw theories from Fury, Schaefer, and Dihal's earlier research about public sphere and controversial technologies such as abortion and biotechnology. So they proposed a framework to measure public debate around science and the technology along three dimensions. These are the standing, framing, and positioning. So just to go through them very briefly, standing measures the prevalence of different social actors or stakeholders in public debate, and framing refers to the contextualization or interpretation of a science topic. whereas positioning describes the prevalence of different evaluations of a science topic, such as a positive or negative evaluation. So based on such three-dimensional framework, we designed our study to interrogate the narrative about artificial intelligence between different social groups and social actors through these three specific research questions. So the comparative perspective we integrated in this study is twofold. So on the first level, we use People's Daily Online as the proxy to understanding the most official narrative about artificial intelligence. And we use that as a reference point to examine to what extent WeChat or other social media may serve as an alternative or counter public sphere where different kind of narrative may emerge to compete against the official storylines. On the second level, we also identify different actor groups from social media and to compare how differently they talked about artificial intelligence. So the data we used in this study consists of over 100 and 120,000 articles from WeChat public accounts, and also another 20,000 articles from People's Daily Online. And all those articles were published between January of 2015 and October of 2018. That was when we actually started the data analysis. And now I'm going to just quickly explain a kind of analysis we did to answer the three research questions I just posed. So to identify different actor groups on WeChat, we conducted a qualitative analysis of a sample of 1,010 WeChat public profiles. So based on their verification information and also self-reported function description, we grouped them into categories such as government agency, media organization, and industry actors. And then to understand how they framed AI differently, we employed a two-step process. So as a first part, we conducted automatic topic modeling to identify the key topics appearing in both corpora. And then with the identified topics, we qualitatively allocate them into these 6 frames. So these frames are developed based on Gerhard and Schaefer's earlier science communication research. So this framework consists of economic, scientific, cultural, entertainment frames, and also socio-ethical frame, educational frame, and political frame. Because I think most of the names of these frames are very self-explanatory. But if you want to have more detailed explanation about exactly how we place different topics, if you can refer to our paper, we have a good visualization to see exactly how we allocate different topics. So when we analyze the positioning toward AI, we use sentiment as a proxy to assessing different actors' evaluation about AI. So we conducted sentiment analysis with this specific dictionary, which were actually validated with human validation. And now I'm just going to present some key findings from all this analysis we did. In case of actor, what we found was that industry actors are the most prominent group who made up over 46% of all profiles we analyzed. And about 10% of profiles were actually registered by media organizations such as newspaper and TV stations. And we also identified a small portion of government agency accounts, civil society accounts, and also 30% of non-institutional accounts, which refers to public accounts registered by individuals. And when we looked into the contribution of articles from these user groups, we found that technology companies, they were not just the most visible actors, they were also the most active contributors of AI-related articles in the database. So tech companies, they contributed over 51% of all articles we included in this study. So all the different actor groups here, we identified they vary a lot in terms of size and their activity. When it comes to the way they talk about AI, we were expecting to see a more distinctive pattern. They may have a different focus when we discuss about artificial intelligence. However, when we broke down all the articles based on the frame they use, we actually identified a more or less very similar pattern. For example, we found that the economic frame was the most dominant frame used across all 7 actor groups, which was followed by size and scientific frame. And such dominance of the economic frame was not just relevant to WeChat. We also identified the prevalence, very prevalent presence of economic frame on people's daily here, which is on the right-hand side of the slides. So on this slide, we use time series visualization to demonstrate the fluctuate or evolve of popularity of these 6 frames we identified. So economic frame was the most dominant one on both platforms. And not surprisingly, we also found that the political content was more visible on people's daily than on WeChat. However, when we compare the time series trend, we found out that in both cases, WeChat and people's daily, the popularity of the political frame is actually going up. So we see an uprising trend in here. Another very important takeaway from the time series analysis we conducted here was about the socio-ethical frame. We identify a steady decline of visibility of discussion over socio-ethical issues around AI, such as the general reflection about human-machine relationship and also other ethical consideration about AI. And in the case of people's daily, we actually didn't find a visible presence of such ethical, such frame at all. But it does not mean that there is absolutely no discussion on such issues. It only means that in the corpus from people's daily, the presence of such frame was not prevalent enough for our model to identify them. And so far, I have gone over some of the key findings on the first 2 research questions, which were about the actors and the frame. And now I'm going to move to discuss some findings we got on the question about positioning, which is the sentiment toward AI. So in this line plot, the red line represents the sentiment score we calculated from WeChat, and the green line here is people's daily online. So the plot, the score here refers to the relative risk between positive and negative sentiment toward AI. So we can understand simply as every time when the line is above this y=1 line, there is more positive than negative sentiment. So what we can see here is that people's daily has a higher value and also higher volatility, which means more fluctuation in the sentiment score than on WeChat. This shows that the coverage or the discussion about artificial intelligence is more sensational and also more positive. And I think this is relevant to the question we heard before in Wu Fang's presentation about how different social groups and actor groups position themselves differently towards AI. So in here, we actually organized all the sentiments score into actor groups. And what we can see here is that all actor groups achieve way more positive sentiment than negative. And with the government accounts on WeChat and the people's daily showing the most positive score. Because as we know, government accounts on WeChat share and repost lots of content from state media. So in terms of content, there's a lot of overlap. So that's also partially explain how these both actors achieved equally similar high sentiment score here in this case. So overall, the finding on positioning reflects on, we think, a general openness and the passion for digital technology in wider Chinese society, which also has been mentioned by a number of previous studies. And to conclude, results from our study shows that the public discussion about artificial intelligence in China are actually becoming increasingly homogeneous, with a decline in more critical voices. And second, based on our finding, we also concluded that the social media played actually a very limited role as a counter public sphere, where we expected to see more alternative or competing narratives about AI, which could potentially challenge in the country's official narratives about such technologies, especially its economic and political potencies. As some final reflection, in the paper, we also pointed out that we believe more diversified voice can be helpful in terms of help the country to establish a more healthy vision about AI, or potentially even more sustainable AI development strategies. And we also point out that such affirmative hegemony we observed from our study can also be relevant to a wider context, because the AI development strategies could later be introduced or diffused to other countries. So as a closing remark, I would like to raise a question, maybe for myself and for other panelists here, on how we should visualize a good AI society in the Chinese context. For example, in Corinne Kath and her colleagues' paper called Artificial Intelligence and Good Society, they outlined their vision about a good AI society, wherein all the efforts of development should be steered toward promoting the public good. So some important question for us to reflect on or to think about is what constitutes as good public good in the Chinese context. So to what extent we should weight the private individual good against the collective and public good. Personally, I think those are some very important questions for AI researchers, especially like myself, interested in the Chinese context, to think about. Those are very fundamental questions, for example, in a discussion about ethics of artificial intelligence. Should there be, or is there a universal value in such concepts we call ethics of artificial intelligence? So with lots of unanswered questions, myself and my collaborators from Berlin, the Hick Institute for Internet and Society Research, we are about to launch a new project under the name AI Imaginaries. So because of the pandemic, we postponed the starting point of this project, but at this moment, we plan to officially kick off this project in the second half of 2021. And I would like to use this opportunity to announce this project a bit prematurely. And most importantly, I would like to stay in touch with the researchers I met today. If you are interested in this project or interested in even having future potential collaboration with us, please get in touch. I will be researching on this topic for at least another 3 years. So I believe there will be lots of opportunity for us to continue our conversation from today on. So that is all from me, and thank you for your attention. Those are my contact details, and I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you, Dr. Zeng. Now we will move to Yishu's presentation. Yishu will share her research on discourses on AI and ethics based on qualitative content analysis of WeChat public accounts and Zhihu.
All right, can you see my slide?
Not now, not yet.
Wait. Now, yes? Great, thank you. Thank you, Xingyuan, for the introduction, and many thanks go to the Global AI Narratives team, as well as Berg Green China Center to give me this opportunity to share some of my preliminary findings from a research that I have been doing with my colleague Christine Schikupfer, who is based at Trier University in Germany. So the speakers, the former speakers had laid a very excellent and thorough overview about the state of discussion and narratives on AI in general in China. And I hope to contribute some perspective from my research about AI and ethics specifically, and more also from the qualitative side and in terms of the granularity of this narrative. So the research questions for us was mostly these three. How are the ethical and societal impacts of AI are being discussed on Chinese social media? And the second, who are the active voices that are shaping the debate and discussions? And the third question is, what are the similarities and differences between different stakeholders' opinions on these social media platforms? So a few words about our methodology. We adopted a qualitative content analysis approach, and we chose two social media platforms, WeChat, which has already been quite prominent talked about by the speakers before. And so I will only give a few words about Zhihu for those maybe who are not very familiar with the Chinese social media landscape. Zhihu is like Quora, which is a Q&A forum where users could pose questions and then answer each other. This platform is advertised as a community to share firsthand knowledge and insights in China. So by the communication design as well as user base, it's quite different from WeChat's public accounts. How we collected our data, we used two keywords combination, AI ethics and AI morality. And we started to collect this data already from 1.5 years ago. We started quite small scale, but then we expanded our data set until just the end of last year, December 31st, 2020. Because there are a lot of articles and posts, mostly so on WeChat public accounts, that are simply fact-only reporting, or for example, only audio and video content or events promotion, we cleansed our data and included only opinion piece in Zhihu and WeChat. And we developed a coding scheme based on literature review of current debate about AI ethics globally, as well as the literature which was mentioned by Dr. Zeng, framing studies prominently featured in communication studies. And I will be talking about more these variables in the following slides. So we looked at authors of these discussions and take each article in the case of WeChat and each answer in the case of Zhihu as a unit of analysis. And we found that on WeChat, the most prominent voices are from the academia, followed by those from media organizations, and followed by companies and organizations in the industry, mostly IT industry. This includes both IT companies as well as industry consultancies. We also found some presence of government-affiliated organizations, but not very prominently. And there's only a small portion of we call general public, who are the authors that we cannot find identification information. But there are also some others organizations such as law firms or civil society organizations on this topic. On Zhihu, on the contrary, over 70% of the voices are from the members of the public. And there's the second largest proportion of these voices are from the academia, followed by industry and media. So even though we chose the two platforms because of our understanding of their different user base, our results shows that indeed the voices on these two platforms are quite different. However, they're very diverse. So in each of the articles and posts we looked at, because they're opinion pieces, some of them focus on specific AI applications, and some of them focus on general philosophical discussion about AI ethics. And some of them maybe start with a more philosophical discussion and zoom into particular applications. For each of this unit analysis, we code 3 maximum contexts of discussion. And the result shows that on both platforms, most of the discussion talk about more general and philosophical aspect of AI ethics. These include, for example, the discussion about nature of the technology. For example, whether AI could ever possess moral agency. Or these discussions include the discussion about nature of humanity. For example, whether what's intelligence, what is emotion, and so on. The second most popular context of discussion we found on Zhihu is labor, so AI concerning employment and in context of labor. This might not come as surprising because of the large proportion of the general public on this platform. The second most popular discussed context of AI application is autonomous vehicles, which is also quite present on Zhihu. But this is mostly the case because the so-called trolley problem is a very often used example to introduce the topic of AI ethics. What's notable is also that on WeChat, AI ethics concerning autonomous weapons, as well as in the field of justice, for example, AI judges, AI in courts, were discussed on WeChat. However, it is not present on Zhihu. And because of these are opinion pieces, often there are clearly statements about an assessment of the risk and opportunities about AI technology in these articles and answers. And for here, I will quote from 2 of these examples. For the risk, Duan Weiwen, who is a researcher at Chinese Academy of Science, as well as a prominent AI ethics researcher in China, said, the increasing application of AI and automated decision-making systems, including robots, is not only an open-ended technological innovation with uncertain consequences, but also a social ethical experiment with far-reaching impact in the history of human civilization. End of quote. So AI technological innovation, we hear it very often in China as well as in the global context. However, this quote from Duan Weiwen really shows and stresses the more dark side of AI, which is also a social ethical experiment with unknown risks. And to quote example for the opportunity statement, a Zhihu user, Min Cheng, said in a post that as a person who lost his hands, AI has indeed brought some changes to my life. Let me type on the keyboard, play table tennis, and write calligraphy. He wrote this post because due to some accident, he lost his hands and he used AI technology to gain some normality in his life. So examples like this, we coded them according to the assessment of risk and opportunity, but notably there's a large portion of statements that shows a rather neutral perception of AI's ethical and social impacts. Now, I am aware of that there are many existing research about that Chinese people, the public, are more optimistic about AI technology. However, I would not say that my research finding contradicts that because of the prominence of risk, because please keep in mind that the research keyword I use to collect this data are AI ethics and AI morality. In China, just like anywhere else in the world, the discussion associated with AI ethics more focused on the risk side. But it's still very notable that a large portion from these two platforms actually show rather neutral perception, even regarding AI's ethical and social impact. To also give some examples, for example, Shen Weixing, who is the Dean of Tsinghua University Law School, said in an article he wrote on WeChat, technology itself has the character of a double-edged sword. It will inevitably bring some harm as it progresses, but we cannot return to the era of slash and burn cultivation. Technology has brought us on the road of no return, but we do not need to feel anxious and discouraged because of this. We should embrace technology with a more open mind and be fully prepared. End of quote. Another example from Huang Tiejun, who's a professor of School of Information Science and Technology at Beijing University. According to him, AI surpassing human intelligence is a trend of future evolution. Technological innovation and development should not be restricted by the limitations of human beings. We should treat the development of AI with a more open mind. So these two quotes express rather neutral assessment of AI technology in general. However, it also have a sense of technological determinism, which is quite notable in the Chinese context. For the risk and opportunity and neutral assessments, in many of these articles, the authors give specific examples to address their concerns and their hopes. So using Dr. Kanta's word, fears and hopes. So in our research, we also coded each of these concerns and hopes that we can find. So it is, it's necessary to explain, because in some of the articles, even though the general assessment is positive or neutral, the authors do turn to talk more about the risks, because in the end, these articles are talking about AI ethics. So from the results, it's very notable that on Zhihu, where most of the users are members of the general public, they address concerns for humanity. Under these categories, we include not just the fear for the so-called singularity that AI will one day surpass human, but also a lot of the questions that were also addressed in Dr. Kanta's research. Many fundamental questions about human being, for example, what is the meaning of life and what does it mean to be human when all the tedious work are replaced and we will just stay home? And so questions like this, we also coded under this category. What is also notable is on both platforms, there are quite a variety of concerns addressed. However, on Zhihu, there are the concerns for individual risks, such as bias, discrimination concerns, the concerns about the responsibility of AI systems when they fall, as well as privacy concerns are still quite rarely addressed on Zhihu. But on WeChat, this variety of concerns are roughly equally addressed. It is also quite notable that on Zhihu, there are still slightly more optimistic examples cited to support argument that AI will provide social benefits. And also some qualitative observations. This is an example I really like. It actually just happened very recently, the end of 2020. So we observed that a lot of the discussions in China addressing specific concerns on social media are sparked by controversial events. For example, this is a very example with Chinese characteristics, because people, when they go to buy properties in China, they often go and visit several times to decide if they actually like the apartment or not. And it turned out a lot of these property sellers and developers, they install facial recognition technology in the buildings. So then this technology could record who are the customers that come more often to view the flats, and then they increase the price of the property for this particular group. And this was exposed on Chinese social media, and it raised very wide criticisms, however, not about facial recognition technologies in general, but rather criticizing those property developers and sellers that they use this kind of technology appropriately to discriminate customers. So what I also want to stress is that there are a lot of arguments in this articles that might not fall into any of the category that we code. However, there are quite some arguments that we found recurring and still very noteworthy, which is about the status of ethics in Chinese society concerning AI. To quote a user from Zhihu, before the emergence of strong AI with self-awareness, the question of AI ethics are still questions of human ethics. If strong AI with self-awareness emerges, superior to humans in every way, it has two choices. First, to replace humans. Second, becomes a caretaker of humans. Ethics is always a law set by the strong against the weak. End of quote. Another similar argument we found on Zhihu says, the strong can use a large amount of social resources and wealth to hire a group of people to demonstrate the correctness of their own behavioral ethics from a professional point of view. Under this non-reciprocal game situation, the weak have no way and can only be slaughtered. So we really sense of cynical attitudes toward the role of ethics in terms of AI governance, particularly among Zhihu users. In many of these articles, the authors did not just stop before assessing AI technologies and address concerns, but also provide concrete recommendations regarding how to govern future AI technologies. And we coded these recommendations as well in each of the unit of analysis. And for each unit of analysis, we included 3 maximum recommendations. So we found that on WeChat, the most popular, the most suggested approach is the legal standard approach, which advocates the use of legal instruments, laws, and technical standards to govern AI. It is very notable also here that on both platforms, the authors seem to prefer completely opposite approaches as to how to govern AI. As I said, on Zhihu, people suggest legal standard approach, but no, sorry, on WeChat, people suggest legal and standard approach. However, on Zhihu, the most popular approach is the so-called self-responsibility approach, which advocates that users and consumers, individuals, they are responsible for their own future when the AI age comes, and they should engage in lifelong learning to improve themselves, to face the threats and competition that will bring by AI. And on WeChat, the second most recommended approach is the research approach, which advocates that researchers and academics are responsible for the future governance of AI, that there should be more investigation and social research conducted. And this also might not be surprising because of the large presence of academia actors on WeChat. However, on Zhihu, the second most popular approach is the so-called technical approach. On Zhihu, a lot of the users are developers and workers from the tech industry, and a lot of them also advocate that in order to mitigate the risk that could be brought by AI, there will be other technical solutions For example, federated learning or GAN, there will always be other technical solutions to combat the risk that AI will bring. So I would like to also give some examples which are given by Zhihu users that show a rather unique, I would say, Chinese public's opinion, which is quite, I would say, deeply influenced by Chinese philosophy. For example, one Zhihu user Qiyue said, accepting AI's coming of age means an adjustment of how we ourselves evolve to the needs that will come up due to new changes. Change is eternal. What doesn't change is the moment. It's a very Taoist philosophical statement as regarding to the perception of change. And another quote from Zhihu user, another Zhihu user says, human needs to maintain a tolerant mindset of continuous learning. There is a large amount of new information pouring into our lives every day. If there's no ability to accept changes, then one will soon be limited by time. Learning a bit of programming language properly, know yourself and your enemy, so you can never lose a battle. If you need to understand AI better, then learning how to manipulate them might be a necessary skill for the future. So this statement shows quite Confucian philosophy, which is about lifelong self-cultivation and learning. Because we also wanted to understand how Chinese is the Chinese discourse about AI ethics, we coded also in each article when they cited foreign influence. Of course, we cannot code Chinese influence because these actors themselves are Chinese, but our analysis also found that on WeChat, the discussion is quite connected to global discussion about AI ethics. About more than 30% of the authors cited scholarly work and policy documents from abroad, mostly from both European countries as well as the US. But there are also some authors citing more than these two regions. For example, Japanese or Canadian policy documents. However, on Zhihu, the users do not cite international resources as often. When they cite, most of them are American sources, and most of these sources are science fictions. To conclude, by observing the different opinions and preferences on the two platforms, we observed a gap between the so-called elites and the general public's understanding of AI ethics. Moreover, the discussion in China, we observed that focus more on the long-term risks for humanity rather than the imminent risks of specific applications for individuals. The discussion also features more prominently an attitude that's relatively neutral to AI technology's ethical and social impacts. And it demonstrates also a recurring theme of technological determinism. Lastly, there is an overlooked connection between Chinese narratives and global narratives, just as we saw that how often are international sources cited in the Chinese public discussion about AI ethics. Thank you very much, and I'm very looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Yishu. We have around 20 minutes for Q&A. So the first question is, to what extent can and how Chinese public can engage into the discussion of AI, since the media industry and government somehow influence the Chinese public's perception of AI? In other words, how can you perceive the public's contribution and involvement into the perception of AI rather than only being receivers?
Maybe Shui can first of all stop sharing on screen.
Oh yeah, please.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so to answer that question, that's a good question to start with. And I would first of all want to say that I think in general, the Chinese approach to artificial intelligence is very pragmatic. So in a society, China talks and money talks a lot, as also indicated by the finding from our research. The power, the influence from the industry sector is very influential. Speaking of which, that means the users or general public, rather than passive receiver, they can be very powerful. In Chinese, we have a saying that 顾客 is 上帝, the customer, the God. So what will be really beneficial for the future development or direction of artificial intelligence, in my opinion, is to make the general public as a consumer of different AI products be more aware. And I think if there's a demand from the consumer side, that would really have impact to direct the future trajectory of how the industry develop their own or launch their frame, package their own products. So yeah, that's my main point to answer this question. I don't know, did I answer the question?
I will maybe also contribute another perspective about the so-called public opinion on Chinese social media. So there is, when I do this kind of research, I always get questioned. So how do you know that these are the real public opinion? Because Chinese social media are quite censored, right? But I would say about topics like AI, there is also other side of the story, which is the national initiative about the so-called science popularization, science communication, that there's also goals and initiatives from the government that scholars and social scientists or other scientists should engage on these media platforms and educate the public about the potential risk and issues evolved around this technology. So yeah, that's my understanding of why it's despite censorship and despite that the platforms we're looking are limited, and of course they don't represent the so-called Chinese public opinion, but it's still very valuable to look at this social media platforms.
I also want to add one point. Yishu just mentioned about the speculated censorship around discussion about artificial intelligence. That's actually one of the questions we got from our reviewers, and we actually did have empirical data to answer that question based on our evidence. We didn't find any evidence to support the argument that discussion around this topic has been censored. We monitored two major databases that archived the censored posts from WeChat and also other social media in China. And based on our analysis of those two data sets, we found the presence of deleted censored content is very, very little. So yeah, that's something we can, I think there's a question about that, about censorship and WeChat and Weibo, that kind of thing. So I think we could answer that question too.
Okay, then another question is for Yishu. How are AI morality and AI ethics generally defined or understood in China by researchers and also by Chinese public?
Yeah, that's a very good question. When we tried to define a keyword search for this debate, we kind of played around with the keyword, and in fact, we found that most of the debates about the so-called ethical questions that are in the Western discussion are discussed under the term AI morality in China. And the choice of different words, AI morality and AI ethics, are actually very deeply influenced by Chinese philosophical traditions that many scholars argue that ethics, which in Chinese is 伦理, it's a relatively new concept introduced from the West to China, which in China it's always used as 道德, which is the relation between people. And so the question of what's the definition of these two, but so in short, in the past decades, there are more discussion using the term 伦理, but many, especially vernacular debates about these questions are still under the term morality.
Thank you. And also there's a question for Jing. When you mentioned about academics being positive about the technology, I wonder, who do you mean by academics? Are these academics technologists? Are they legal experts or philosophers or sociologists? To our understanding, in today's public debate about AI and ethics, very often technologists have quite different opinions from sociologists and philosophers.
Thanks for the question. So the first point is that our categorization or labeling of academics mostly refer to institutions. So we actually coded institution account, which is affiliated with an educational institution. So most of them are actually research institutes from the discipline of computer science and informatics. So the presence of academic voice, which is very, I don't know, very techy. So that's a very important point we found, and also in our discussion, we actually explicitly address that as a problem, because we believe that more researchers or academics from the background of social science and the humanities in general should be included or should have a more visible presence in the discussion about AI-related issues. So examples will be people sitting here today. I think I agree with the attendees a point that definitely we in general address, not just have a different opinion, we also address the issue of this kind of technology from a very different perspective. So it's not about better or worse. I think these two sides of academic community should work together, and there is a lot of room for that kind of future collaboration or a dialogue between these two camps of AI researcher. Yeah.
And next, there's a question for Yishu. To Yishu, great choice of platforms. You understand the Chinese social media environment really well. The question is, your result seems to be contradictory with Jing Zeng's. Can I interpret it as since 2018, there has been more discussions and criticisms about AI ethics in China?
Yes, in fact, since earliest 2014, there are sporadic discussion about ethical and societal impacts of AI in China, and it really shot up since 2018. However, I wouldn't say that my findings contradict Dr. Zeng's finding, because please keep in mind, we used the keyword AI ethics and AI morality, and we found in total, even include those event promotions and fact-only reporting when, for example, EU released its guideline, there are a lot of reporting about this. So even including those, we had just more than 3,000 entries when we scraped the data from Sogo on WeChat. So this is a really small collection of data on this topic. And yeah, that's initially also why we decided that we can do a qualitative analysis based on this data set. So yeah, in short, there are still very, very a small debate in the entire China on this topic.
Okay. So thank you for Yishu's answer. And also, there's another question for Yishu. Which US science fiction do Zhihu users tend to refer to, and in what context?
The single most often cited science fiction are from Isaac Asimov, and the 3 rules of robotics is the most cited one to introduce the concept of AI ethics, to lay the groundwork to start engage more detailed discussion on this topic. But other more contemporary science fiction movies and TV shows such as Her, or The Westworld and Black Mirror, or Ex Machina. They are also quite widely cited to illustrate especially Zhihu users' point.